I've worked as a night security guard for a few months now. It's an easy job, quiet, predictable. The office building is one of those sleek, glass-covered corporate towers in downtown Seattle. During the day, it's bustling with executives, assistants, and the steady hum of business. At night, it becomes something else entirely. Silent, empty, almost hollow. The lights take on a different quality, buzzing too softly, flickering just enough to make me second-guess myself. The air feels heavier when you're the only one inside. My routine is simple. Monitor the security feeds, patrol the hallways, check the locks, and wait for morning. I prefer it that way, but there's one thing about this job I can't shake. Harold. He's the janitor on the night shift. An older guy with thinning gray hair and a hunched posture that makes him look smaller than he actually is. He moves too quietly. I never hear him coming. One moment I'll be alone, and the next, he's standing at the end of the hallway, watching. At first, I figured I was just getting used to the isolation. Some people are naturally quiet, and maybe Harold was one of them. But then I started noticing things. I'd see him in places where he had no reason to be. Standing at the far end of an empty office, hands by his sides, staring out the window. His reflection in the glass always seemed wrong, like it didn't quite match his real body. Sometimes I'd turn a corner and catch him standing in the middle of the hallway, unmoving. The second I blinked, he'd be gone. One night, I checked the security feeds and caught something strange. One of the cameras glitched, static, just for a second. When the image cleared, Harold was standing in an empty hallway staring at the wall. I had just checked that area myself. He wasn't there before. He wasn't moving, just standing. Then the screen cut to static again. When the feed returned, he was gone. This happened over and over. Always the same camera, always the same unsettling image. Harold standing motionless, staring at nothing. I started feeling uneasy every time I patrolled the halls, convinced that if I turned too quickly, I'd see him standing there, watching. Then things started disappearing from my desk. A pen here, my keycard there. I assumed I was being careless until I found them in places that didn't make sense. My keycard, left in a stairwell no one used. A pen, tucked inside a locked supply closet. I had no explanation. But the worst part was that I never actually saw anything move. I would turn my back and something would be gone. I started feeling like I wasn't alone, even when my monitors told me I was. I was afraid to stop and turn my back on one or two instances to look beyond the wall. The night everything changed, I saw Harold on the security feed again. This time, he was in the basement. The basement hadn't been used in years. It was an old storage area, emptied out when the company moved their files to a digital system. No one had any reason to go down there. But there he was, standing outside a maintenance room, his hand resting on the door. I grabbed my flashlight and headed downstairs. The stairwell was colder than the rest of the building, the air thick and stale. My footsteps echoed in the concrete hallway, too loud in the stillness. The door to the maintenance room was slightly open. Harold wasn't there. I hesitated before pushing it open the rest of the way. The room looked normal, cleaning supplies, tools, spare parts for the HVAC system. But something felt wrong. The air was heavier, damp. A faint metallic scent lingered beneath the dust. I scanned the shelves, my flashlight sweeping across old equipment and forgotten junk. Then I saw it. A door. It was hidden behind a metal shelving unit, barely visible in the dim light. It had no handle, just a rusted keyhole and a corroded plaque that read, "Authorized personnel only." Every instinct told me to leave, but I couldn't. I searched the shelves until I found a set of old keys. My fingers trembled as I slid one into the lock. It turned. The door creaked open. A narrow stairwell led down into darkness. The deeper I went, the colder it got. The smell grew stronger, musty, damp, metallic. My flashlight flickered, the beam struggling against the shadows. At the bottom of the stairs, a single hallway stretched forward, lined with old storage lockers. At the end of the hall was another door. It wasn't locked. I pushed it open. Inside, the room was small, cluttered with boxes and shelves. Photographs, clothing, personal belongings, and then the other things. Locks of hair tied with string, blood-stained rags, bones. In the center of the room was a rusted cot. On it lay a faded photograph. I picked it up. It was a picture of a family. Harold's family. The door behind me slammed shut. I spun around, the flashlight beam shaking. Harold stood in the doorway. His face was calm, unreadable. "You shouldn't have found this," he said softly. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. "What is this place?" Harold smiled, slow and deliberate. "This," he said, gesturing to the room, "is where I keep the things I care about." I bolted. I shoved past him, running up the stairs 2 at a time. I could hear his footsteps behind me, slow, steady. I reached the top, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I didn't stop running until I was back in the security office. My hands shook as I dialed 911, barely able to explain what had happened. The police arrived within minutes, but when they searched the basement, the door was gone. Harold was never found. I quit the next morning. Months later, I still feel like he's out there, watching, and sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps. I quit the security job the morning after that night in the basement, packed up my things, signed the resignation papers without a second thought, and never looked back. The police never found Harold, never even found the hidden room. They told me there was no such door in the maintenance area, no underground chamber filled with bones and relics of his past. But I know what I saw. I still hear the footsteps sometimes, still feel that heavy presence in the dark corners of my apartment when I'm alone. But I moved on. At least I told myself I did. Months later, I found myself in Austin, Texas, trying to piece my life back together. New city, new job. I didn't want security work anymore. Too much time alone, too much space for my mind to wander. So I took a job at a mid-sized advertising firm as a building assistant. Nothing major, just handling supplies, making sure conference rooms were set up, basic admin work. The kind of job where I could be around people during the day, where I wouldn't feel like I was the only one left in the world at night. And then, somehow, I ended up alone again. It was an innocent mistake. The company was on a deadline, the marketing department scrambling to finish a major project for a big client. They needed someone to stay late to keep the office open, make sure the equipment was running, and handle any last-minute printouts or delivery. I volunteered, figured it was an easy way to earn some extra cash. It was just an office. A modern, open-concept workspace with big windows and overpriced coffee machines. It wasn't like the glass tower in Seattle. It wasn't like the basement. At first, it was fine, quiet, empty, almost peaceful. I worked on reports, made coffee, and scrolled through my phone. But then the little things started happening. The first time I noticed it, I was in the break room. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee when I heard the rustling of papers from across the office. I turned, expecting to see one of the marketing team members who had stayed late. But the office was empty. The papers on a nearby desk were shifting slightly, like someone had just disturbed them. I told myself it was the air conditioning. The second time, I was at my desk typing up an equipment order. The office was silent except for the steady clicking of my keyboard. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the unmistakable sound of a chair creaking. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keys. The sound came from the far end of the room, where no one had been sitting all night. When I looked, the chair was rocking slightly, as if someone had just stood up from it. I pushed it aside, convinced I was imagining things. But then the footsteps started, soft at first, distant, a slow, deliberate pacing through the hallways. I stood, peering past the rows of empty desks, waiting for someone to appear, but no one ever did. The sound would stop the moment I got too close, only to start again somewhere else. I checked the security system, convinced I wasn't alone. Every door was locked, every window sealed. There was no one else in the building. The reflections were worse. I would be staring at my monitor, focused on a spreadsheet, when I'd see something in the screen's dim reflection, a figure moving behind me. The first few times, I dismissed it as my own shadow shifting in the glow of the monitor, but then I started seeing it even when I was completely still. One night, I caught a full glimpse of it. I had turned my screen to black while I was on a call, and there it was, a faint outline standing near the far wall. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. I spun around so fast my chair nearly tipped over. There was nothing there. But when I turned back to the monitor, the reflection remained. I should have left then. I should have packed up my things, called my boss, and quit on the spot. But I told myself it was stress, that I was letting my imagination get the best of me. That was until I asked around. I casually brought it up to one of the older employees, framing it like a joke. Ever get the feeling this place is haunted? I laughed, expecting them to wave it off. Instead, their face darkened. You heard the footsteps, didn't you? I forced a chuckle. So it's not just me. They sighed. It started years ago, before you were here, before I was here. We don't talk about it. That was the first time I heard her name. Dana. She had been a marketing assistant just like me, worked late shifts to meet deadlines. One night, she had a heart attack at her desk. No one found her until the next morning. The cleaning crew said her eyes were still open, staring at the ceiling like she had seen something right before she died. I laughed it off, pretended the story didn't get under my skin, but that night the office felt different, colder. Like the air was thicker, heavier. I stayed glued to my desk, refusing to look at the monitors. I didn't want to see the reflections anymore. Then the whispering started. Soft at first, just barely audible over the hum of the computers. My name. I stood abruptly, knocking over my chair. The whispering stopped. I checked every corner of the office, my pulse hammering in my ears. I was alone. I grabbed my bag, ready to leave, when the lights flickered. That's when I saw her. At the far end of the office, just outside the range of the emergency lights, a pale figure standing completely still. Her eyes were wide, vacant, unblinking. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. She took a step forward. The lights flickered again. She was gone. I ran. Left my laptop, my keys, everything. I didn't stop until I was in my car, gasping for breath, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I quit the next morning. No explanation, no excuses, just an email that said I wouldn't be coming back. The office is still there, people still work late, still pull all-nighters to meet deadlines, but no one ever stays alone anymore. And sometimes, when I pass by the building at night, I swear I see someone standing in the window, watching. I left that office job behind without a second glance. I told myself it was just another bad memory, something to bury under long work days and sleepless nights. But some things don't stay buried. Some things follow. The reflections in darkened windows, the whispers just out of reach, the feeling of being watched. I thought I could outrun them, but the truth is, they linger. Denver was supposed to be a fresh start. A friend hooked me up with a job at a massive shipping warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Nights were quiet, mostly just me and a skeleton crew handling inventory. Long rows of towering shelves, forklifts humming in the distance, the occasional radio chatter from the break room. It was mindless work, and that was exactly what I wanted. At first, everything was fine. The routine settled in quickly. Check inventory, update logs, reorganize stock when necessary. The warehouse was huge, the kind of place that swallowed sound, where your own footsteps echoed back at you from directions they shouldn't. The lights were harsh, buzzing overhead in long, flickering strips, but the shadows between the shelving units always seemed just a little too deep. The noises started about a month in. I was in one of the back aisles, stacking pallets, when I heard it. Metal scraping against concrete. Not a big crash, just something shifting. I turned, expecting to see one of the other workers, but I was alone. The warehouse stretched out, silent and still. I told myself it was just the building settling, maybe a shelf shifting under the weight of its load. But then I heard it again. Closer. Footsteps. Not the heavy, deliberate kind from work boots. These were soft, almost hesitant, like bare feet on the cold floor. I called out, but no one answered. The silence pressed in, thick and waiting. I walked toward the main aisle, scanning the rows of shelves. No one was there. The air felt different, heavy, like the warehouse was holding its breath. I tried to shake it off. Exhaustion does weird things to your mind. But that was only the beginning. The cameras started acting up next. I would check the monitors in the back office and see static where there shouldn't be any. One night I was watching the feeds when I saw something. A figure at the far end of aisle 6. The image was blurry, distorted, but it was definitely someone standing there. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. The aisle was empty. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The only sound was the steady hum of the overhead lights. Then, just as I was about to turn back, the radio on my belt crackled. A burst of static, followed by something that sounded like breathing. I bolted back to the office. Things escalated after that. The noises became more frequent, scraping metal, footsteps that stopped the moment I listened too closely, whispers in the static of the intercom system. I started seeing movement in the corners of my vision, flickers of shadow between the towering shelves. Every time I turned, there was nothing there. One night I found handprints on the dust-covered loading dock door. Small, smudged prints, like a child's. We didn't have kids in the warehouse. I started checking the security footage obsessively, hoping to catch something, anything that made sense, but every time I saw movement, the feed would cut out. I started leaving lights on in the aisles, anything to push back the shadows, but it didn't help. The breaking point came when I saw it up close. It was late, past midnight. I was reorganizing a section near the back when the overhead lights flickered. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. The flickering stopped, leaving the warehouse dim and unevenly lit. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the aisle, a figure stood perfectly still. It was tall, its limbs too long, its head tilted slightly, like it was listening. The light didn't reach it completely, leaving its features obscured, but I could see its eyes. Hollow. Black. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. A cold wave of terror crawled up my spine. My breath came in shallow gasps as I forced myself to step back, not breaking eye contact. The moment I moved, the figure twitched. A single jerky movement like a puppet whose strings had just been yanked. Then it took a step toward me. I ran. I didn't think, didn't stop, just sprinted down the aisle, past rows of stacked boxes, dodging around pallets. I could hear it behind me. Its footsteps weren't heavy, but they were fast. Too fast. I reached the break room, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the keys. The lights flickered again, and for a moment I swore I saw its reflection in the vending machine glass. The security alarm blared, an automatic trigger when I locked the emergency exit. The sound shattered the silence, and I heard something, an inhuman screech, like metal tear. Then, nothing. When the light steadied, the hallway was empty. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They searched the warehouse but found nothing. No sign of forced entry. No evidence that anyone had been there at all. I quit the next morning. No notice, no explanation, just walked out and never looked back. Whatever was in that warehouse, it wasn't human. And I wasn't going to wait around to find out what it wanted. I left the warehouse behind the same way I had left the office job before it, quickly, without looking back. The paycheck wasn't worth it. Whatever had been lurking in those aisles, hiding in the shadows just beyond the reach of the lights, it wasn't something I could explain. I didn't try. I packed up, moved on, convinced myself it was just another place I wasn't meant to be. Work was harder to come by after that. I took temp jobs where I could find them, never staying anywhere long enough to get comfortable. The unease never fully left me. I started sleeping with the lights on, keeping the television running just for the sound of human voices. I didn't like the quiet anymore. The quiet left too much room for the things I didn't want to think about. That's how I ended up driving deliveries. It was easy, mindless work. Pick up the package, drop it off, move on. I liked being in my van, the hum of the engine beneath me, the road stretching out into the night. It was predictable, safe, at least that's what I told myself. The industrial park was at the edge of town, a cluster of warehouses and shipping centers with nothing but dark, empty streets between them. It was the last stop on my route, and I was already tired, already ready to call it a night. I pulled up to the first address, an old shipping facility with a loading dock that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The place was dead silent, not even the usual flicker of a security light. I grabbed the package, stepped out of the van, and that's when I saw him, a man, standing perfectly still near the back of the building, just beyond the reach of the streetlights. At first I thought he was a worker, maybe a guard, but something was off. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even shifting his weight, just standing there, rigid, like he was waiting for something. I hesitated, fingers tightening around the package. "Hey," I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. "You work here?" No response. I took a step forward, angling my head to get a better look, but the second I did, he was gone. Not walked away, not turned, just gone. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep moving, to drop the package off and get back to my van. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it had been a trick of the shadows. I told myself that as I scanned the barcode, set the package down, and practically sprinted back to the driver's seat. The rest of the deliveries were routine, nothing unusual, nothing out of place. But the feeling didn't leave me. That crawling unease on the back of my neck. The sense that I wasn't alone. The roads felt darker than before. The streetlights seemed further apart. The last stop was at the far end of the industrial park, a small office building set back from the road. It looked abandoned, the windows covered in grime, the sign out front faded and unreadable. I double-checked the address. This was the place. I stepped out of the van, already moving faster than I should have, already wanting to get this over with. I reached the door, package in hand, when I noticed the note. A single sheet of paper taped to the glass. The handwriting was rushed, jagged, scrawled in thick black marker. "Leave now, you're being watched." My breath caught. I turned, scanning the parking lot, the street beyond, the rows of warehouses stretching into the dark. Nothing. I dropped the package by the door, not even bothering to scan it, not caring if it got marked as delivered or lost. I just wanted to leave. I was halfway back to the van when I heard the sound. A rustling. Not from the bushes, not from the wind, from behind me. I turned slowly. He was there again. Standing at the edge of the lot, half shrouded in darkness, closer this time. His head was tilted slightly, his posture still impossibly stiff. I took a step back, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. The figure twitched. I ran. I threw myself into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. The headlights flared to life, cutting through the darkness, and that's when I saw him again. Standing in the middle of the road, directly in front of my van. The light barely touched him, like he was absorbing it somehow, like the darkness clung to him. His face was still hidden in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me, feel them boring into my skull. I slammed my foot down on the gas. The van lurched forward, the headlights swept over the spot where he stood, and he was gone. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I drove out of the industrial park, past the warehouses, past the empty roads, not stopping until I was miles away. I told my dispatcher I was sick. Told them I wasn't coming in the next night or the night after that. I didn't give them a reason. I didn't need to. I started looking into that place after that night, trying to find some kind of explanation. There wasn't much. The office had been vacant for years, the company that once owned it long since dissolved. But I did find something, a post on an old trucking forum. A driver had stopped for a delivery in the same industrial park, late at night. He saw a man standing near the loading docks. The man didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, watching. The driver ignored him, finished his route. A few nights later, he saw the man again, not in the industrial park, outside his house. I don't check the windows at night anymore. I don't want to know if he followed me home. I stopped checking my rearview mirror after that night in the industrial park. Some things are better left unseen. I took time off, told myself it was just stress, just exhaustion, that my mind had been playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. I knew that whatever I had seen, whatever had been watching me, it wasn't done. I needed a job that wasn't isolated, something with people around. Something that wouldn't leave me alone in the dark with my thoughts. But the bills didn't care about my fears, and the only gig I could find on short notice was night work at an old roadside motel just off Route 66. It wasn't much, a half-abandoned place with a neon sign that buzzed louder than it glowed, a lobby that smelled like stale coffee and dust, and rooms that probably hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in decades. The owner, a guy named Frank, handed me the keys and barely looked up from his newspaper. "Easy job," he grunted. "Check in guests, log the late arrivals, and don't ask questions." I should have walked away right then. My first shift was uneventful. A couple of late-night truckers stopped in for a few hours' sleep. An older couple asked for extra towels, and that was it. The lobby was quiet, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows over the front desk. I sat behind the counter, flipping through old magazines, listening to the hum of the vending machines. Then I heard the footsteps. Soft, deliberate, just outside the lobby doors. I looked up, expecting to see a guest wandering in. But the parking lot was empty. I stepped outside, scanning the lot. The wind had picked up, whistling through the cracked asphalt, but there was no one there. Just the endless stretch of road, the skeletal remains of an old gas station across the street, and the signpost that creaked in the wind. I went back inside, telling myself it was nothing. The first guest complaint came around 2 a.m. A man in room 12 called down, his voice groggy with sleep. "Hey, you got another key to my room?" I frowned. "You locked yourself out?" "No, the door's open." I shut it before I went to bed, but when I woke up, it was wide open. I told him I'd check the security cameras, even though I already knew they didn't work. Frank had made that clear when I started. "They're just for show," he'd said, laughing under his breath. "Nobody wants to break into this dump anyway." I walked down to room 12, the hallway silent except for the faint hum of the vending machines. The door was open, just like the guest had said. He stood inside, rubbing his eyes. "Man, I swear I locked it." I checked the lock. It wasn't broken. No sign of forced entry. I chalked it up to a faulty latch, told him I'd get maintenance to check it in the morning. He muttered something under his breath, shut the door, and that was that. An hour later, room 8 called. "You guys got kids staying here?" The woman on the other end sounded irritated. I glanced at the empty ledger. "No, ma'am, Rye?" I keep hearing giggling. It woke me up, like, right outside my room. A cold chill crawled up my spine. "I'll check it out," I said, my voice steady even though my hands weren't. I walked down the hallway again, slower this time, listening. The air felt heavier, like the motel itself was holding its breath. Then I heard it. Soft, high-pitched laughter. Faint, but close. I turned a corner just in time to see a shadow move past the end of the hall. My heart slammed against my ribs. I rushed forward, expecting to find a guest, some prankster, maybe even a drifter who had snuck in. Nothing. Just the old hallway stretching on forever, the peeling wallpaper, the dim overhead light flickering above room 6. I didn't sleep when my shift ended. The next night, things got worse. I was doing my rounds when I noticed the door to the storage room was ajar. I knew I had locked it. I checked inside, expecting to find a guest who had wandered in by mistake. Instead, I found them, the dolls. I hadn't paid much attention to them before. The motel had a collection of antique dolls displayed behind glass cases in the lobby. Frank said they were historical, though they just looked old and unsettling to me. But I didn't know about these. These weren't in the lobby. These were hidden. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with porcelain faces. Some were missing eyes, others had cracked skin, their painted lips faded with time. One was sitting on the floor, its head tilted back, staring up at me. I stepped closer. It was the only one that didn't have dust on it. Then I saw the hair, not synthetic, not plastic, real. Brown, tangled, woven into the doll's scalp. I stumbled back, my breath coming fast. That's when I noticed the note pinned to the shelf. A photograph. A woman. Her face was familiar. Room 8, the guest from last night. I bolted. I locked the storage room, my fingers shaking, and ran back to the front desk. I needed to call someone, anyone, but before I could grab the phone, a whisper curled around the room. "Now we need one of you." The lobby lights flickered. The front doors swung open with a creak. The doll's glass case rattled. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, ran for my car, and never looked back. Frank called me the next day, asking if I was coming in. I let it go to voicemail. I checked the motel's website later that night, scanning through old reviews, looking for anything, any mention of the things I had seen. Then I found it, a review from months ago, a woman complaining about strange noises, laughter in the hallways, an unlocked door in the middle of the night. The name on the review matched the name on the photograph. She had never checked out. I never went back to the motel. Whatever happened that night, whatever I saw in that storage room, I wasn't going to stick around for answers. Some doors aren't meant to be opened, some things aren't meant to be found. I drove until the desert was behind me, until the neon glow of Route 66 faded into my rearview mirror. I told myself it was over, but the feeling stayed with me. The sense that I had been marked, that something had seen me and now it knew my name. The next job was supposed to be different, a 24-hour gas station just outside of Salem, Oregon. Isolated, sure, but I wasn't the only one there. Customers came in and out all night. Long-haul truckers looking for coffee, drifters stopping to stretch their legs. the occasional car packed with teenagers on a late-night road trip. There were other employees too, though we mostly worked solo shifts. But that was fine. I told myself I could handle it. It wasn't a warehouse, it wasn't an abandoned motel, it was just a gas station. The first night was quiet. The store sat on the edge of an empty stretch of highway, the kind of place where the fog rolled in thick and heavy after dark. The lights from the station barely reached the road, casting weak halos that disappeared into the mist. The only sound was the low hum of the coolers, the occasional beep of the register when someone came in. Around midnight, a trucker walked in, shaking the rain off his jacket. He grabbed a coffee, made some small talk about the weather. When he went to pay, he hesitated. "You ever see that guy out there?" he asked, nodding toward the road. I frowned. "What guy?" He gave me a strange look. Tall, real thin, just stands by the pumps, not moving. I glanced outside. The fog was thick, swirling around the station like something alive. I couldn't see anything past the first set of pumps. "Probably just a hitchhiker," I said, trying to sound casual. The trucker didn't look convinced. He left without another word, and I didn't think much of it. Until the next night when another customer asked the same thing. "You guys got a statue out there or something?" I felt the cold creep into my stomach. "No," I said, forcing a laugh. "Why?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "Swear I saw someone standing by the road when I pulled in. But when I got out of the car, he was gone." I stepped outside after my shift, flashlight in hand. The fog was thicker than usual, pressing in from all sides, swallowing the road beyond the gas station's weak lights. I shined the beam toward the highway. Something moved. Not a person, not an animal, just movement. The fog rippled, the shadows bending, shifting. I went back inside and locked the door. The next few nights, the store felt different. The air was heavier, the lights dimmer, like the fog was pushing in, pressing against the glass. The security cameras started acting up, flickering to static whenever I tried to check the outside feeds. Then, one night, the power flickered. Just for a second. Just long enough for the automatic doors to slide open on their own. The store was empty, the road was empty, but I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, just outside the glow of the lights. I grabbed the bat from behind the counter, my heart hammering in my chest. "Who's there?" My voice sounded too small in the silence. No answer. Then the automatic door chime dinged, the doors slid open, the air turned ice cold. And through the fog, I saw him. Tall, gaunt, dressed in something old, something out of place. His face was shadowed, indistinct, but I knew he was looking at me. The power flickered again, and for a split second, the security cameras snapped back on. I glanced at the monitor. He was standing right behind me. I ran, didn't lock up, didn't turn off the lights, just bolted to my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I looked up once, just for a second. He was standing in the middle of the road, watching. The headlights hit him, and he was gone. I called my manager the next morning, told him I was done. I don't know if he believed me, but he didn't argue. A week later, I checked the employee forum for the gas station. A new post had gone up. "Does anyone else keep seeing that guy outside?" If there's one thing I've learned from these stories, it's that some places were never meant to be disturbed. Sometimes a locked door should stay locked. A figure in the fog should remain unseen. A whisper in the dark should go unanswered. Each of these people thought they were simply doing their jobs. Working the night shift, stocking shelves, making deliveries, checking guests into a motel. Ordinary people in ordinary situations. But the night has a way of revealing things that the daylight keeps hidden. The spaces we pass through without thought during the day become something else entirely when we're alone, when the world quiets down and we're forced to notice the things that shouldn't be there. Jake, the security guard, learned that curiosity can be dangerous. He saw something he wasn't meant to see, and though he managed to escape, he's still looking over his shoulder, still feeling Harold's eyes in the shadows. Megan thought she could handle working late until she realized she was never really alone. She ignored the signs, the whispers, the shifting shadows, until Dana made herself known. Luis dismissed the warnings of an old warehouse, convinced himself the sounds and flickers were just tricks of exhaustion, until he came face to face with something that wasn't human. Travis should have listened to his instincts. He knew something was wrong in that industrial park, and he ignored every sign telling him to turn around. He's safe now. At least, he hopes he is. But just because you leave a place doesn't mean it leaves you. Eric thought he was signing up for an easy job, but he learned too late that some things are waiting, watching, and when they choose you, there's no escape. And then there's Samantha. She saw something in the fog, and now it will never stop seeing her. So what's the lesson? Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If a place feels empty but you swear you're not alone, leave. Don't be the person who ignores the unease creeping up their spine, who convinces themselves it's nothing, only to find themselves trapped with no way out. Some jobs aren't worth it. Some places are meant to be forgotten. Some questions should never be asked. And if you ever find yourself working a late shift, alone in a quiet building, in an empty warehouse, on a deserted road, listen closely. Pay attention, because you might not be as alone as you think. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. If these stories kept you on edge, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. And if you've ever had a terrifying experience on the night shift, share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. Until next time, stay safe, trust your instincts, and remember, sometimes the scariest things happen when the world is asleep.